Jerry,
Yes.
good morning. Hey, how are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you, Morgan?
Great, great. Thanks for calling. Tell me what you want to talk about today.
Well, I'll tell you what. I think there's a lot of negative press aimed to discourage MAGA supporters and marginalize the Trump legal effort. I think we need to resist throwing in the towel because there are indications, I think, that the Democrats could be running scared. There was a law firm representing Pennsylvania Secretary of State, which had to withdraw because one of their attorneys threatened his counterpart on the Trump legal team. And apparently the threat was serious enough that the U.S. Marshals and local police offered to protect the attorney. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I would think there could be some legal jeopardy for the firm or the lawyer which issued these threats. And if the opposition is so sure of themselves, why would they risk such a situation?
Well, that's a great point, Jerry, and I know the story that you're talking about, and I actually personally know the lawyer that was threatened in this story. Now, I haven't talked to her. Her name's Linda Kerns. I haven't talked to her since she was threatened, but I did look into the story, being that I saw the story come out and I recognized her name, and I said, oh, my goodness, it's Linda. So basically, she was representing President Trump and the other plaintiffs in some of the litigation in Pennsylvania, and over the weekend, I think it was last weekend, she was actually received a phone call from a lawyer with the firm representing the Pennsylvania Secretary of State. And the phone call, the guy was dumb enough to leave a voice message on her voicemail and made some kind of threatening comments. Now, I have looked at the court filings, and they don't specify exactly what the threatening comments were, so I can't read them to you in their gory details. But like you said, Jerry, it was enough to trigger U.S. Marshal protection for Linda Kerns. Now, she's ended up withdrawing from the representation. I don't know if that's because the heat has gotten too hot. I mean, she's just a solo practitioner lawyer. This lawyer at the other firm, it's pretty interesting. It's a big firm. It's one of the biggest, Kirkland and Ellis, one of the most storied law firms in the country. And it's interesting because when I was reading up on this ahead of time, she actually confronted the partner handling the case because this apparently was an associate. And their initial position was, you can't prove that voicemail came from us. And then when she was able to prove to them that the voicemail did come from one of their Kirkland and Ellis issued cell phones, then they took the position that, that was just a junior associate. And the associate was acting unilaterally. And now I'm quoting from him. The associate was acting unilaterally in his personal capacity without the knowledge or authorization of undersigned counsel or the firm. And of course, what ultimately happened was the firm had to withdraw very shortly thereafter, probably was fired, but probably had to withdraw even if they weren't fired because now they have somewhat of a conflict of interest now that one of their lawyers, and they should be charged with responsibility, right? Respondeat superior, let the master respond. If they're the employer of this alleged junior associate and he's made this phone call, well, guess what? They're on the hook for it. Now, they're obviously trying to distance themselves by saying he did it in his personal capacity, but that doesn't really make any sense because, the law firm's representing the Secretary of State, Ms. Bukvar, and he's part of the law firm, and he calls opposing counsel regarding a case that they're both working on. That doesn't sound like he's acting in his personal capacity. It does sound like he's way out of bounds. There was obviously some kind of threat to the attorney's physical security to trigger U.S. Marshal protection for her. And that kind of behavior is so completely out of bounds for an attorney, but it's becoming the norm. I'm not saying it's becoming the norm for attorneys, but if you look at what was done by the Lincoln Project about this same time, where they made efforts to what they call dox or reveal the personal contact, the names and personal contact information of other attorneys who were representing President Trump and other plaintiffs in these election lawsuits, they've doxed them and they've said, sure would be a shame if some of our followers did something about this. They don't have to put the fine point on it, do they? What they're suggesting is harass these lawyers, and maybe even more than that, maybe even more than just verbal harassment, leaving threatening phone messages on their phones. Maybe they mean, do something more like what Antifa does, showing up at people's houses, breaking windows, starting fires, like has been done in Washington, D.C. to Tucker Carlson and other journalists we've seen, Antifa doesn't fear showing up at people's houses. And essentially, I mean, the threat of violence is there. It's right under the surface if it's not made explicitly. So now, Jerry, the point that you're bringing up, which is such a great point, is that if they didn't have something to worry about, they being the Democrats, they being the Secretary of State of the state of Pennsylvania and her law firm that's representing her, if they didn't have something to worry about in the case, why would they need to do something like this? Why do they need to resort to these extrajudicial measures to try and win the case? Hey, we're not going to defeat the lawyer in court. We're going to scare her off the case by threatening her. I mean, that is so far removed from the way a lawyer ought to be behaving. And I also want to say I'm a little bit embarrassed at some of these lawyers. Now, we don't know all the details of all the threats that were made to them, but with respect to the ones that got off the case because of the Lincoln Project doxing them and revealing their personal information, a lawyer is supposed to be kind of that person who stands in the gap, who's willing to, put ethics and the needs of the representation of their client ahead of their own personal interests. That's the ultimate goal of the lawyer. To kind of describe it, it reminds me of the old sheriff out west, when they have the criminal who probably is a real criminal, but he's in jail and he's going to be tried when the hanging judge comes around in a few weeks or whatever, and the mob shows up, and the sheriff goes out in front of the jail with a shotgun, and he says, "You're not getting to this criminal except through me." That's kind of what the lawyer is supposed to be like. Now, that's just an analogy. I'm just trying to paint a word picture for folks who are listening so they can understand that the lawyer's supposed to stand up to popular pressure and not supposed to cave under this type of pressure, whether it be from colleagues or from members of the general public, and you're supposed to represent your client. But what we've seen is all the really high-end law firms that were representing the president have all kind of abandoned him under this type of pressure. Now, again, I want to say we don't know exactly what threats were issued and exactly what's been said to them, why they felt that maybe for their own personal safety they just had to get off the case. But I'll just say what a shame. I mean, what a shame that that's how the business gets done. And, hey, if there's nothing to hide, Biden campaign, office of the president-elect or whatever other office they want to make up, if there's nothing to hide, then why not let the legal process work? Because if there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to fear. And at the end of it, you're going to be victorious. So let these people spend all their energy fighting you because at the end of the day, you're going to be victorious. The only reason to resort to these kind of, out-of-bounds activities like threatening people with physical violence is because at the end of the day, if they keep digging, they're going to find something major, and it may be enough to overturn the election. And based on what I've seen and what a lot of us have seen, there's something there. The mainstream media is trying to push this narrative that there's not even any smoke and there's certainly no fire. But anybody who's taken a little bit of time to look at this beyond the headlines and not just go with what the AP says or what the New York Times might say or the Washington Post might say, and you actually dig into some of these stories that you can find in the local press in some of these counties, you'll find major, major issues. And that's something we're going to go over as we get into the next segment. But, Jerry, did that answer your question?
I sure did. And, if I didn't know any better, I would say that some people want us to head to a one-party system, but that's just me.
Well, Jerry, I have to agree with you. And there are even people who suggest that that's essentially what we've had for many years now, that the Democrats and the Republicans are so similar, and they call it the uniparty, the one party, the uniparty. And it's these guys you see on TV. They've got the world's biggest collection of purple ties, right? They love the purple ties because, right, the Democrats are blue, the Republicans are red, but they merged the two, and they're purple. And they represent themselves. They represent the ensconced financial interests that make so much money off of this country. And what do I mean by this country? I mean, that's mine and your tax dollars that we pay to the federal government every year. All that money that flows up from all the states to Washington, D.C., and then gets distributed out to all these boondoggle projects that half of us don't even support. We don't even want our money going to it. You don't think there's plenty of graft and corruption in the movement of all that money? There absolutely is. And the people wearing the purple ties are telling you they are part and parcel of it. They are the uniparty, and they're in it for themselves. They're not in it for we the people. Thank you for listening to the Morgan Streetman Show. We hope you enjoyed what you heard, and if you did, please click like and subscribe to help us out. And remember that we recommend that you exercise your brain at least once a week.